was reading over my abstract this morning, and I realized I made some promises that I cannot deliver on in 20 minutes. I thought I would have a lot more time. So I'm going to give you the Cliffs Notes version. I'm going to talk about the wireless problem at a high level. If you'd like to dig into more detail, please come see me. I'm happy to talk after this, and also you're welcome to come see us at our booth and we'll dive into deeper details. So let's frame this by talking about the wireless problem, and then we'll talk about the art of the possible in terms of solution space. The first thing that I like to point out when telling people that wireless is a problem is that we like to think of our networks as well understood. We've mapped them out. We've got monitoring agents running on them. But the truth of the matter, and this is true even in our most secure spaces, unfortunately, is that there's more going on in the network than what we think is happening. There are devices that end up being installed without the knowledge of IT sometimes. We've had chillers, HVAC systems with Zigbee operating on them. No one knew that Zigbee was open, and those would be somehow controlled by the network, so that's a potential path. There have been door readers with BLE enabled. Procurement didn't realize that BLE was even on those devices, that it was even a capability. So stuff gets into our spaces, and of course, even if we're not talking about the most secure spaces, you can imagine that there's a lot of crap that just comes into these facilities. And we have secure networks that we want to keep secure, but unfortunately all this extra stuff that can ultimately touch those networks, and or if they have audio or video capabilities, could be utilized for surveillance for anything that's happening inside of those spaces. So that's part of the problem. So we recognize that Wi-Fi is part of the network. That's been long recognized. And thankfully, we've worked as a community to secure Wi-Fi. It's not perfect, but we've taken some good steps along those lines. The problem is that there's other stuff out there too. There's cellular, there's Bluetooth, peripherals, wearables, medical devices. You have Nike sneakers that have BLE in them. There's all kinds of things that you wouldn't even imagine. So all of this stuff is potentially part of the network, because if it has the possibility of connecting to the network, we need to be aware of it and treat it as a risk. So then the next question might be, well, is that really a problem? Okay, there's more going on, but have we secured it? And I'm going to claim that we haven't, and there's 3 reasons I say that. 1 is ubiquity, 2 is invisibility, and 3 is vulnerability. The devices and signals that operate in these spaces are everywhere. The signals they send are invisible to us, and we largely don't have mechanisms for bringing visibility to them. And the protocols on which they're built are vulnerable to exploitation. That's the punchline. Let's dig into that a little bit more. So this probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. There are so many devices out there that have wireless interfaces. There's tens of billions of them worldwide. And as I'm sure you know, thanks, Aaron, we have more than our fair share in the United States. You probably have at least a dozen, probably dozens of wirelessly enabled devices just in your own homes. And then you come into work and they're all around you. Again, if you work in a secure facility, hopefully that's been minimized. But as we've learned, unfortunately, it's probably not 100% true. So they're everywhere, and the signals that they send likewise go everywhere. The problem with this is that these are electromagnetic waves, and they operate in a part of the frequency that generally goes through all of the physical barriers that we put in place. These waves sail right through drywall. They go through all of our physical security mechanisms. So a device can be a threat even if it hasn't penetrated physical security. So that's part of the problem, is ubiquity. Secondly, invisibility. I mentioned these are electromagnetic waves that our devices are using to communicate. They operate in a portion of the spectrum where we as humans aren't sensitive to that radiation. In fact, what we are sensitive to is just a very narrow slice of the spectrum. So this kind of pictures the spectrum. Little slice is what we see with our eyes. Everything else, we have no idea. And all of this stuff is open for terrestrial communications, and we can't see any of it. So we need specialized instrumentation to even bring some awareness to these signals, right? And one of the simplest things we could imagine would be a spectrum analyzer. You have a system that sweeps across a broad range of frequencies, mixes that energy down to a lower range, and then pumps it through a diode power detector. And so we can see power versus frequency and time. And these are commodity systems, they're readily available, they're expensive, but you can do this. The problem is that it still lacks the granularity, the fidelity, and the detail that we need in order to make sense out of what's happening. All this tells us is that in aggregate, there's energy in certain frequencies at certain times, but beyond that, we don't know much more. So visibility is lacking, and then the protocols that these devices use to communicate are very vulnerable to attack. This is just a sample from the CVE database looking at these wireless protocols, Zigbee, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, and you can see the growth trend is not good. It's growing exponentially. And what I like to say about this is only what we know. Unfortunately, what we know is only ever the tip of the iceberg. There's more vulnerability than we're aware of. And some of those vulnerabilities will end up being discovered by the bad guys and potentially used against us in the form of zero-day attacks. But just what we know tells a story, right? These are very vulnerable. And we shouldn't think they are. If you're just a random user and you're not in the cyberspace, of course, you might just be very naive, but we're all hopefully in somewhat of the cyberspace. Now you know that this stuff can be attacked. And I'd love to tell you more detail about that, but again, we'll have to dive into in some other forum. I just don't have the time. So we've long recognized, or certain portions of our community have long recognized that there are problems here. And so there have been requirements that have been put in place. Now, this is partly due to the fact that the art of the possible has evolved in the last 10 and 20 years. We now have the capability to do something about the wireless problem that I just outlined. And I think that's part of the reason that requirements are starting to coalesce in a more comprehensive way. There was a memo that was issued by the Secretary of Defense last June laying out a comprehensive strategy for dealing with insider threats. And one of the aspects of that was to provision for electronic device detection systems in SCIFs and SAPFs. The idea was that we should be programming for such systems with a deadline of September 30, 2024. That deadline just recently passed, so I think we can expect continuing guidance from the Secretary of Defense's office regarding this, but there's an awareness at the highest levels that this needs to be addressed. There are other documents that I think are relevant to this community, including the CSFC WIDS Annex, published by the NSA, that lays out requirements for WIDS and WIP systems. WIDS, by the way, stands for Wireless Intrusion Detection System, and the P in WIPS is for protection. CMMC applies to DoD contractors and deals with some form of wireless intrusion detection. So there's awareness and there are requirements out there to do something about this. And then if you're not within the DoD space, this probably still applies to you, but this also applies more broadly. There's ISO and NIST requirements and several others that touch on this in various ways. So we're developing an understanding that yes, wireless is an issue. So now what do we do about it? Well, the first thing to do is address the visibility problem. If wireless signals are not visible, we can't defend our systems against them and or defend our networks, including the wireless piece, against whatever attack may infringe upon them. So the first step is continuous RF detection and localization. So let me describe to you the art of the possible here. We'll describe it one way or another, but I hope that I'll have slides to do it with. I'm going to start talking, and hopefully I'll have some slides to talk to. So with Bastille, the way we deal with this is we utilize some very capable software-defined radios as RF sensors. These are about the size of an access point, and we'll deploy these sensors throughout a facility, and they continually scan the spectrum looking for wireless signals. We look at cellular, Bluetooth Classic, Bluetooth Low Energy, Wi-Fi, and Zigbee and other IoT protocols based on the IEEE 802.15.4 spec. So we're looking for a family of wireless protocols that are commonly used for terrestrial communications. These sensors then work together, detecting those signals, decoding the headers of the packets that they detect, from which they can extract a whole host of metadata. And then they work together to localize those emissions in space. So what you get is temporal, spatial, and behavioral information such that you could lay down icons in one of our UIs that I'd love to show you. You can picture it. It displays a floor plan. Yeah, maybe a reboot's in order. Displays a floor plan with a bunch of icons overlaid where the icons are positioned at the location that was calculated by the system. So you can look at a snapshot in time and you can see where all of your wireless devices are in your space. Then you can drill down into individual icons and it will pull up all the metadata that was extracted from the packet headers. And that metadata includes things like identity information, connectivity, manufacturer, data rate. There's all kinds of information available from that that can tell us interesting things about the system, about the device, about who it's talking to, how it's behaving generally. We're just going to disconnect this guy. I'll try it again in a second. So you've got all this data, and you can always go back in time and you see where things were and how things have evolved. And that's probably enough right there just to begin to bring some visibility and to begin to enforce wireless policy where wireless devices have been specifically excluded for the reasons that I've already talked about. So there are good reasons for us to prevent devices from coming into our spaces. And now, with a system like this, we have a mechanism for enforcing that policy, right? Now, what we've seen, unfortunately, is that in spaces where devices are excluded, we have Bastille systems deployed, and for years going on now, well, the Bastille system has been continuously collecting this data. We see still nearly daily infractions in SCIF areas where large numbers of people are coming into that facility. And without that kind of visibility, we have no idea, right? We just have, in fact, I've worked in some of these places over the years throughout my career, and I just sort of naively assumed that everybody signed their name on a piece of paper and we were good to go. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We're all humans, and we sometimes make mistakes. Not you guys in this room, I'm sure, but some of your colleagues might sometimes bring stuff in that they're not supposed to. Well, now we have a mechanism for bringing visibility to that. It's critical that we do so. Because of the wireless problem, we have because of the wireless problem, we have this this risk that isn't currently being addressed fully. Okay, so now that we have a capability for bringing visibility to this, what can we do with it? There's so we have a rich set of data. Now we want to analyze that data and try to determine how things are behaving. So this can be useful in a broad range of environments. where we want to know, based on the information that we're seeing, is a device behaving inappropriately? So is it, for example, tethering to something and exchanging data where it shouldn't be? A use case in an environment like you guys might operate in, for example, might be, I have a medical device, perhaps it's a hearing aid that is authorized to go into secure spaces. But it might not be a great idea if that hearing aid were to pair over Bluetooth to my phone that's in the car in the parking lot outside. So having the ability to identify that pairing took place and then alerting on that pairing could be a critical thing for us to do, right? And that might not even be something that the person wearing the hearing aid is aware has happened. They are an unwitting party to this data exfiltration path, and now they've become an insider threat, right? So there's a couple of key capabilities here that would work a lot better with pictures, but there's a couple of key capabilities that we've been able to figure out how to do. One of them has to do with bringing visibility to the cellular protocols. So in cellular, it turns out it's really difficult to detect and individually locate devices when, for all of the traffic that the cellular devices are passing. So it's easy enough to do for control packets, but once a cell phone has been given a traffic channel allocation, the resource allocation that's done is all encrypted. So there's no way to bring visibility. There's no way to bring visibility to that device when it's passing traffic channels unless you can figure out a way to identify where that device is communicating in time and frequency, right? So Bastille long ago cracked that nut, and we can now bring visibility to all of the different packets that a cell phone sends, whereas other such systems that do the same kind of thing, they'll either do one of two things. They'll either just detect on power only, which means they're going to have a lot of false alarms, and they have no ability to localize individual devices, or they'll just look for those control packets, which may happen once or just a few times during a 24-hour period. So they get very little visibility into it. So with Bastille, we can bring visibility to the whole thing. That's critical, because otherwise you may have a phone that goes into a facility and comes right back out, and you never even saw it. The other key capability that I want to highlight is the ability to detect all Bluetooth traffic. And I'll dig into the details just briefly. I don't have a ton of time, but the basic idea here is that Bluetooth is hopping in frequency across its channel allocations. So when a device connects to another device, they create a channel map, and they're going to hop in some sequence that nobody else should be able to follow. So a simple way to handle the Bluetooth protocol is to just park on a dedicated advertising channel and listen for everything that's happening on that channel, because now I'm going to get a lot of insight about individual devices and their capabilities. And that's what most systems will do. The problem is, if that's all I'm looking at, then I will become blind to that device when it connects to another device, because now it's going to start frequency hopping all over the place. So with Bastille, we have some very capable software-defined radios with broad front ends, broadband RF front ends, and they will just suck in all of that spectrum, and on the back end disambiguate and figure out who's talking to who. So they can individually identify every device. And now that it's almost too late, I'll show you the picture. Oh, maybe I should connect it again. So they'll be able to individually identify all of the devices in the interaction, find out who's talking to who is central, who's peripheral, and locate them individually. Oh wow, what is that? Wow, this has been a dumpster fire. Thanks for hanging in there with me. All right, so after you've gotten all this data, you've got the historical information. Did you want a picture of that one? Yeah. After you got all that, we want to close the loop by integrating with other security systems. Nobody solves all the problems alone. We've developed a number of integrations with folks like Aruba, Cisco, Splunk, Linnell OnGuard, PagerDuty, and a number of others to help bring all the information into a single system, to help cross-pollinate data sources, to issue alerts, things of that nature. So the idea here, if you followed me through all this without the pretty pictures, wireless is a problem. We need to bring visibility to it. We do that with a number of pieces and components, RF sensors, metadata that's extracted. We do localization. We do some analytics. I talked briefly about that, not a lot. And then, of course, on integrations. And the whole goal is to detect threats and automate the response. Thanks very much for your patience and your attention. We can dig in deeper if you'd like to come see us at our booth 1200. And again, I'll stick around if people have questions, happy to chat. Thanks very much.